What is up, everybody? Back for another quick thought. And today's quick thought, I wanted to talk about Luke Green after it gets some of the new cards from the new set. So I tried to make a list with using as many new cards as I thought were relevant. The biggest changes from my list that stand out first are the Gray Squadron Y-Wing. So I have three of in there. So if you've watched any of my Luke Green videos, I talk about how important it is to have early units in space. So we have 5 2-drops in space in this deck, and I think Gray Squadron Y-Wing is amazing against Control, which is one of your more difficult matchups because most of the time they're not going to have units out there. So it's going to be basically a 3-3. Even against aggro or anything else, which is a more favorable matchup, it's still very good because it's putting pressure on their units. So it's a great card. I can't wait to use this card in this deck. I think there's a lot of cards in this that were in the new set that are potentially good for this deck, and it just really requires a lot of playtesting and fiddling with things, fiddling around with things. But that was one card I was like, absolutely, that's going in here. So I lowered the count of Resort Arc by 1, and I lowered the Devotion count by 1. And the reason I did that is because the next great card that we get is Razor Crest. Now you might want to add the third devotion back in because when Razor Crest is played, it allows you to get an upgrade back from your discard pile. So it does give you more options. So the reason that I don't have it at 3 is because of the card next to Razor Crest that I'll talk about here in a second. But Razor Crest, so it took the place of Consortium Star Viper in the main board for me, and that's because it always has Restore 2. Consortium has to have the initiative, and with Luke, sometimes with shields, that doesn't happen. So Razor Crest is just a better card. It costs 1 more, but it is worth it. It has great stats, a 3-4. It gives you the ability of getting back upgrades. And if you watched a video I did a long time ago about Razor Crest, I used it in a Mandalorian deck that I was just play testing around with, and it was such a good card. So I think that card fits great in here, and I think it is an amazing card, and people are going to realize how amazing it is the more they play with it. The next card is the Adelphi Patrol Wing, which is basically a fleet lieutenant in space with 4/6 stats, and it costs 5 resources. So it has really great stats across the board, and I wanted to fit in a couple of them because it basically does the same thing as fleet lieutenant, but in space, as long as you have the initiative. And I mean, just being able to put a shield on that thing too with Luke just feels really good. So if you wanted to take that card out, which I don't see why you would, but if you did, then that's when you can add in like the third devotion or something and something else. But to me, it felt great as a 2 of because it's just a great card. I can't wait to try that out as well. Obviously, there's a lot more cards, like I said, that Luke Green could really benefit from, and it just really requires a lot of playtesting to figure out which ones of those make the most sense based on the gameplay with them. But these were the ones that really stood out to me as like, I want these in the deck right away. I already think Luke Green is one of the best decks in the game. I think people still underestimate how good this deck is for some reason. Being able to shield your units is still undervalued for some reason. It's so great against barrage. You have these new space units give you an even better matchup against Boba, which is considered one of your weaker matchups. But you already have Bright Hope. Now you have Razor Crest and Adelphi, and you have Gray Squadron. So I mean, your space units get a lot better. Your ground game was already very good against Boba. So, and then on top of that, you have U-Wing and Redemption, and Redemption's amazing against Boba. So I think this deck just gets even better, and I think it's going to fly to the top, and it's going to get a lot more attention because of a lot of the new cards. Okay, so a couple of the other new cards that I wanted to show you that I could consider for this Luke Green updated deck was Clone Deserter, and actually I just think that replaces R2-D2 just because it's a better 1-drop. It has Restore 1. The bounty is your opponent gets to draw a card, but I think it's worth it in Luke because you get to shield it, so it's going to get in for 1 to 2 attacks typically if they even try to kill it, before they try to kill it. So I think that makes sense to just go ahead and switch that out for R2. The scry is great and everything, but I'd still rather be putting damage on the board to win faster. So that extra 1 damage makes a big difference with the shield because it just, the math is better for killing units as well against super aggro decks. So, and having a shield on this is great because it also has restore 1. Depending on how well this performs, it's definitely a consideration to be 3 of as well, just because of the price of it, and it fits in nicely with Ewing. Another card I marked was Freetown Backup. I think Freetown Backup has potential. It's a pretty cool card. Like, it's only a 1/4, so that part's not great. But I think in certain decks it could be really good. I'm not sure if it fits into Luke, that's why it's not on the list. But I do really like the give another friendly unit +2/+2. I think that works really well with like cards like Steadfast Battalion that have Overwhelm. So you can just make like a giant Overwhelm unit. So it might fit into Luke later on, but right now I would say no. Another one I thought was interesting was Concord Dawn. I definitely, again, don't like the 1 power, and that's why I don't like Sundari Peacekeeper either. But I do like the fact that it's +2/0 while defending, and it's a 3-cost Sentinel for 3/4. So, I mean, for that purpose, it's good. But I mean, we have Bright Hope in here, so we don't really need this card, and that's why I didn't make the list. Sundari Peacekeeper, I really like the Raid 2 and the Restore 2, so it's a 3/5. If you pump this thing up somehow with like experience tokens, I think it gets a lot better. But unfortunately, I think it's more of a Mandalorian unit. I think you could play it into Luke, but again, I don't like that when it's defending, it's a 1/5. So it just doesn't do a whole lot. And I could see this being something that my opponent would want to take out quickly because it's a 3/5 and then it has Restore 2. But I do like that it has 5 HP. So this is definitely a card that's like on the edge. Like I want to figure out a way to make it work, but just not in there right now. The next one was Echo. Again, a lot of these units have Restore, and that's why they're considerations, because Luke, you just having all this, the life gain is just great. This one, you may discard a card from your hand, give 2 experience tokens to a unit in play with the same name as the discarded card. So I'm not sure where this fits in yet. I like the idea of it. I like when it's played, it gives 2 experience tokens if you're able to discard a card that you have in play already. I just feel like that's going to be, there has to be some kind of card or some kind of deck that this card makes sense for eventually. And I don't think it makes sense in here. Like ideally, I love the idea of giving something 2 experience tokens in Luke, but just doesn't fit in right now and may not ever fit into this deck. Another one that I think is definitely a very strong consideration is Rose Tico. I think it makes more sense if you're playing Energy Conversion Lab though, because you can attack in first with Rose Tico, defeat the shield and make it a 4/6. But I still think this card is worthy of a consideration because it fits into the mold of Luke where you're like shielding everything and then defeating those shields to give things 2 experience tokens. So it's a very cool card. It's again, it's like on the border of being in the list for me. You might want to cut like 1 Kanan, but I just feel like Kanan is better overall for what I want to do in this deck. But I could see this, like I said, I think it makes a lot of sense in an ECL deck. But I don't really want to play Luke with ECL. Not right now. Not unless it's just like full of life gain with every unit, which is very possible with the cards that I just mentioned. Like you could make Luke just all the units have restore. So there's definitely a possibility that this completely changes by the time I start playing this deck. But as of right now, I think this card's just a strong consideration card that I'll have to kind of test more and see how it feels and when it feels good and things like that. But that kind of fits into the Sundari Peacekeeper thing that I was talking about. Like if you give something like Sundari 2 experience tokens, then all of a sudden it's a 3/7 with Raid 2, so it's a 5/7 with Restore 2. So like that's like those 2 cards I think pair very well together, but that requires you to change the core of the deck at that point. Like you're losing like if you look at this list, like then I'm having to consider Echo Base or Fleet Lieutenant in that spot, or Battlefield Marine even, which I don't want to do. Kanan, I'd have to let that go a little bit. I'd have to be weaker in space potentially. There's a lot of things that I'd have to consider. So, um, yeah, and that was the last card to consider. But yeah, just wanted to show those cards and kind of how the other options that I've seen so far for Luke. But so this deck could look totally different in a month. So who knows? Really just depends on how it performs and play. But there's just so many choices. But this is a good starting point. I'm super excited to see how this deck performs once the new set rolls around. And then I just took out home one from the main board. I had one in the main board and put all three of those in the sideboard. I think that's just really crucial against control. I already play 2 Vigilance, which I think is very good against control. And then 3 Spark of Rebellion in the sideboard, which has also been very, very good against control at 4 cost. So I think your control matchup is very good. I think Luke Green in general just has very good matchups across the board. So that is my quick thought for the day. But give it a shot and check it out yourself and test it out on Force Table and let me know what you guys think. And y'all have a good one. Peace out.